We're finishing up what we started last week, still in the Glory of the Lord series, but because there was so much last week, I broke it in half. So we're finishing up this week what we started last week when Moses says, "Show me your glory," in Exodus 33. A couple things to bring along with us into this week from last week. I had made the statement that we cannot know God or ourselves without a personal relationship with God that grows, and specifically from hand to face. I used that expression several times last week about the things that God does, his hand moving to his face and really desiring to know him. Not just the things that he's going to do for us, but him personally, which is at the heart of every love relationship, isn't it? Moving from what he's done to who he is. And that's what Moses, when he says, "Show me your glory," that's really what he's crying out for, is your hand has been all over us. And we love you, Lord, and we thank you for that. But I want to know you. I want to see your glory. I want to know your glory. Last week, in order to really get hold of the context of that statement from Moses, it involves 3 chapters, Exodus 32, 33, and 34. In Exodus 32, just a review kind of, is where the golden calf thing is. And what I had said was that that golden calf episode, when God says to Moses that they've turned aside from my ways, basically it's a statement that says, you know, I've done these things for you. Yes, my hand has been upon you and I've done these things, but the lifestyle that you're leading as a result is not the way that I'm trying to lead you to live. So it has to do with lifestyle. And so then we get how God responds to the idolatry of the golden calf, and Moses responds to God and responds to Aaron. You get all these, there's a lot going on in that chapter. But at one point, we get something that's very, very hard to catch in the English, because it just says when Moses talks to Aaron and says, "You have committed a great sin." Well, that just sounds like, okay, so it's a great sin. But it's a legal term in Hebrew that means you've committed adultery. Now, that gets a little tricky, because we know that he called his children, my firstborn, he actually says, out of Egypt. He doesn't say, "I called my wife out." He says, "I called my children out." And adultery is not a sin that can occur between a parent and a child. It happens between a husband and a wife. So Moses identifies this sin as relationally adultery. So I said last week there's implications regarding the law and the covenant. When we think of the law, the 10 Commandments, all that stuff, 613 laws, and the covenant that God talked about before he ever gave them the law. They're two different things. And these are things, to be honest with you, most of us have considered them the same or have never really thought about. What I said last week, the implications of the law is almost like a father with his children. This is the way that we live. But the covenant that was made was different than the law. I'm not saying it wasn't related to the law, but it wasn't the law. It was his covenant. The first time the covenant is mentioned to the children of Israel is before Mount Sinai, before the law. Doesn't have to do with the law. Jeremiah 31, verses 31 and 32.
"Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord."
So he says, I made a covenant with them when they came out, and they broke the covenant. I was a good husband to them. They weren't a very good wife, is basically what he's saying. So he's referring, it's not just me that's picking this stuff like out of the air, if you know what I mean. It's in the scriptures, but we never quite put it together quite the way it's actually presented. So adultery is committed, and that brings us into Exodus 33, where God says to Moses, you know, I'm not going with you into the promised land. But it's almost like he says, but my hand will, because he says, I'm going to do all the things I said I would do, which has to do with his hand. My hand's going with you, but my face is not. When Moses announces that to the Israelites, they go into mourning and they're really upset about the whole thing. Verses 9, 10, and 11 in Exodus 33.
"And it came to pass, as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked to Moses. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose up and worshipped, every man in his tent door."
So we had said last week that Moses moves his tent outside the camp. And so what's being described is God would meet with Moses in his tent outside the camp. The people would look on from afar, and that's what's being described. We said last week that it's just an expression, face to face as a man speaks to his friend, is an expression that there was nothing between them. It's different from what is said later about no man can see the face of God. And it gets a little bit complicated because they're the same words. They're not the same in Hebrew, but they're the same in our English language. So it gets kind of tricky trying to sort the whole thing out. We don't really need to. The point is that Moses is meeting with God. I think the kind of relationship that we seriously desire, I've got to guess all of us in this room seriously desire, because when we read from Numbers 12 and Deuteronomy 4 last week, it says very clearly that there was a form. There was a form. So he was seeing God in a way that nobody else was seeing him. It says clearly, back at the mountain, you heard the voice, but you did not see the form, over and over and over again, talking to all the people. And Moses, and this to me is very challenging, and it's the thing that I think the church has not entered into, which is very, very sad, because it's like history repeating itself. God is calling them into something new and different, and we like where we're at. But I like my building. I like Sunday mornings. I like, these are all the things that I like. And God is saying, well, that's fine. That's great. But I want to reveal myself to you in greater measure. And that's what he says to them. I'm going to appear to you in a thick cloud. That's different than the clouds that you've been seeing. And they see that thick cloud, and it's pretty awesome, scary. And so though he's calling them, Moses ends up going into the thick cloud. And all I want to say to all of us here today, and anybody who's watching, is that calling forth into something new and different that you've never experienced before in God. There's something great waiting. This was the word for this year about moving forward, going forth, a breakthrough into something new. It's a new place. You don't have to go. You can stay back and make golden calves if you want. But that is just not what God has for us. He's calling us forward. Why? Moses is the only one who sees the form. Moses is the one that meets with God face to face as a man meets with his friend. Moses is the one who meets with God mouth to mouth. Moses is the one who's having more than an experience. His heart's desire is God. I want to know you. And we sing that in songs. But if we're honest with each other, we don't live it. We don't go after him the way we go after our next breath. It's not a matter of pointing fingers or guilt. It's none of that. It's just reality. What we're looking at here is a guy who is serious. When he says, show me your glory, I want to know you more. I want to know your essence and your nature. I don't need any more parting of the Red Seas. I don't need manna. I don't need quails. I don't need any more miracles. I don't need you to do this for me anymore, because I know you will anyway. You're a good dad. I don't have to break your chops to do stuff. I don't have to complain and moan. This is where Moses is at when he says, I want to know you more. And it's almost like when all is said and done, yes, we have the body of Christ, and we have our relationships and the fellowship we enjoy and all that stuff. But truth be known, you can't have my experience. And I don't want yours, quite frankly. And the place where Moses is right now, he's with all these people, 2 million people. And it's like he's interceded for them in prayer and everything else several times. But the bottom line is me and you, God. Show me your glory. Me and you, Lord. It's not an exclusive relationship. It's a love relationship. When God reminds Moses that he's a jealous God, God's jealousy is inseparable from love. In other words, he loves Moses. Moses loves him. There's something going on I don't want. God is saying to Moses and to the nation to share you with anybody. I don't know anybody who's ever gotten married and says, yeah, but if my wife wants to, carry on with a few guys, and that's all right. I don't know anybody who even thinks like that. It's exclusive. And what you're really expressing is I'm jealous for the person. I'm not envious of them where I want. Envy and jealousy are two different things. And God reminds him, listen, I'm absolutely nuts about you. I do not want to share you with anybody else. And it's not so much because he's a possessive God. He knows what that does to us. You show me somebody who's been unfaithful in a situation, who has committed adultery and all that, and I will show you somebody with problems. More problems than they had if they would have stayed pure. This is a whole different subject. But what God is describing to Moses when he says to him, he reminds him when he repeats the covenant, that he's a jealous God. I told you that in Exodus 20. That I don't want you to have any other gods. I don't want you making graven images of anything in heaven, on earth, of man, of anything. Because God knew, he does know, that once you cross that line, and you make golden calves, once you start crossing that line, failure and heartache are not far behind. Every time. That's just the way it works. It's not like he's on an ego trip. He's trying to protect us and help us because he loves us. And he's very concerned about following him. When he says they've turned from my way, they're developing a lifestyle that is inconsistent with the life that I've actually given them. And after all is said about worship, I know that we have worship seminars. And how do you sing? How do you put together a list? How do you pray? We always have all these how-to when it comes. Worship is our lives. It's a lifestyle. It's what happens when we leave here, not when we come here, to be honest with you. What do our lives look like this afternoon, tonight, the rest of the week? Because that's what worship is about. God had refreshed their souls. He had taken care of the separation. Everything was dealt with, refreshed, restored. And now the question is, so now that we've got that all sorted, now what? Are you going to walk with me the way I lead, or are you going to make your own way? It's a very challenging question. It's not challenging as long as God's way is my way. I'm okay with that. The challenge is when God's way is different than the way I want to go. And we said that's what the word stiff-necked has to do with. Stiff-necked has to do with an animal. It's a farming term. That means the animal, his neck is fixed, it's stiff, and he won't go the way that the farmer's trying to lead him. They're stiff-necked, and that is used repeatedly of the nation. They just refuse to follow me.